What's going on? This is another episode of Behind the Glass Booth. We have a very, very special guest with us today, Nick Sansano from the Bronx, New York. Nick, thank you so much for being here, man. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My
I
pleasure.
know you did this before. We did this before, but had a little technical difficulties. So I didn't really want to ask you for a second one out of respect for you, but you were so cool about it, and I wanted to get this interview. There's some stories you have that people haven't heard yet, and especially music aficionados, music producer, sound engineer aficionados. They know who you are, but they should know more, in my opinion. There's going to be a lot of people watching this who, are young and aren't even aware of some of the projects you've done, and they're going to go back and listen to them. So I think this is important for people to know. So I think it's fair right off the bat to say that you are a legend, icon in your field of, I guess, sound engineering, audio engineering, and some music production as well, if I'm correct on that.
Yeah. It's pretty much equal. Mixing, recording, producing. It's
Hmm.
pretty balanced at this point. And in the beginning, I started out really only, mostly anyway, recording and mixing. But that was my way into what I ultimately wanted to do was to produce. So
Produce records.
yeah, yeah.
Right. Cool. And just to down the line of some, and the reason I say that I feel it's safe to say that you are a legend icon in your field. Some of the projects you've done, and some of the songs you've done have had a huge impact. And I'm not big on necessarily record sales. If people want to Google the record sales these projects have done, they've definitely sold records. I'm not saying that record sales are not important or relevant. They are. But as far as impact, you did how many Public Enemy albums did you did? And I know you did in entirety a few, and then you also did some other songs here and there.
Yeah. Let's see. It Takes a Nation of Millions and Music in Our Message. They were pretty much like along for the whole record. And
Good.
Fear of a Black Planet, um, assorted songs, because I was actually co-producing and recording another band at the time that record was being made in the
Hmm.
same studio though. So
Wow.
so even though it was going on, I would do a couple of bits and pieces here and there with Hank and Chuck, and then go back to my project. I was working with Sonic Youth at the time on the album Goo. So
And this was during Fear of a Black Planet.
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And you engineered the entire Sonic Youth album?
Yeah, I recorded and co-produced that album with the band, and then I just did some mixing and recording for Hank and for the Bomb Squad on
Hmm.
the Fear of a Black Planet.
Okay, that's awesome. I was going to get to the Sonic Youth stuff, so since you already brought it up, that's cool. You
Yeah,
also did.
the PE and the Sonic Youth, they coexist. They could never be separated in my mind because they happened at the same studios for the most part. The band and then the PE sort of posse hanging out. So they'll always be in my mind. I don't know. They're always attached to each other, even
Yeah.
to the extent that Chuck was on a song. For
Yeah,
some.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. And
So
and,
it's
and
like,
the genres, obviously hip hop and rock, but those particular sounds, I believe we call it noise rock. Is that what it's called?
yeah.
Yeah.
Like the Sonic Youth stuff that could definitely be categorized as noise rock. Yeah.
And then that sound is not that different from the Public Enemy sound in many ways. And you obviously your fingerprint being on those is kind of the thing that gives it that sound, or a large part of it. Is that fair?
I mean, I don't want to oversell my value. I mean, both Sonic Youth and Public Enemy, they had the concepts. They knew what they wanted to make at the end of the day. They brought in the content. It was, so I mean, yeah. At the time, I think it was a challenge capturing it and making it happen on a recording. you know,
Mhm.
because it
Mhm.
is, it's aggressive, it's noisy, it's unconventional, it's, you know, it's the type of sound that works in a PA system, that works in a club, or works in a, you know, coming through some huge speakers, but is it the type of sound that you can get detail out of and have it translate into an album? You know, I would say
Mhm.
that that's where I contributed, but I don't want to oversell my value because, you know, I'm not the artist. I didn't write the songs. You know, my perspective is the thing that I do is I make real what's in their minds.
Mhm.
I,
Mhm.
it's because it has to become tangible somehow. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate your.
Well, if you say, okay, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. You say you didn't write the songs. Now, co-production in rock, because producing in hip hop, obviously, even in hip
Yes.
hop, there's definitely room for, there's some wiggle room there as far as that term producer.
Right.
But often it also means the co-writer that you wrote
That's
the
correct.
music. So if you saying you did, so as a co-producer on the Sonic Youth album, what was your role as quote unquote co-producer?
Well, how it would be recorded,
Okay.
arrangements, you know, the arrangements of the songs, the structures of the songs, the editing, the takes, melodic embellishments, textural embellishments. It's so in rock and like that style of music, production doesn't have an automatic you know, attachment to composition.
Hmm.
You know, you're coming in and you're working on what, well, things that I just spoke about, things like tempo and key and structure and how it would be recorded. Do you do it in overdubs? Do you do it live? Where it would be recorded? The gear you would use, assessing the takes, editing takes, all that kind of stuff. It's again, it's more about it's a further dive into making it sound and become tangible, taking that concept, taking that idea and making it tangible.
Okay. Okay. So this comes brings about a kind of current debate. At least for me, a lot of people disagree with me. I remember when I interviewed and Bob Power, he disagreed, and I feel that everything you just described, you
Mm-hmm.
should get publishing for. I feel that way, and I know a lot of people would agree. Now, obviously, not maybe not 50%, maybe not the same as the person who's coming up with the chord progressions and the lyrics and the melodies. But you did say, what's the word you use of melody, melodic? You
You
used
know,
the word
embellishment or
melodic
development,
embellishment, texture.
texture,
Um,
counter melodies, blah blah
there you
blah.
go.
You know,
There
like,
you.
oh, let's put strings on this song, let's put horns on this song. I hear maybe it would come in here, maybe it would be, I don't know, very diatonic, very much, you know, a soft, beautiful background, or maybe it should be completely obnoxious. You know, it's more of these sort of extras that
Mhm.
you add into making the song impactful, but not really writing the song. I hear you, and I'll tell you a story. Actually, there's a band that I produced called I Am. They're a hip hop band
I'm
from
de-
Marseille.
definitely familiar.
Yeah,
I love French rap, by the way, and I'm a big fan of I Am,
I did a
and I
lot of
know you did a
different
lot of work with them.
rap projects, and what they hired me to do um, was to essentially assemble. Like they had all these, they had the beats, they had the obviously the lyrics, they had, you know, but they didn't have the well, they didn't have the skills of actually being able to record everything, sequence everything, you know, fine tune sounds, again, arrangements, sample selection, that kind of stuff. So, and that was like, that's not publishing. That's not publishing worthy in the tradition of what a producer,
The traditional sense.
in that traditional sense. But with that band, I worked with them a lot on their solo projects and stuff. And there was a point when I kind of came to the same conclusion you came to. Okay. And I said, look, you know what? on these songs, X, Y, and Z, like that's my section. Like I wrote that section, or that's my melody that is now carrying that entire section, or that is my like my intro, or that's my whatever. And and, and I did get, like you said, a portion of publishing. And so did the DJ, in fact, because we had a DJ, and they were like, well, you know, if you're saying that, then we got to share it with someone else who brought in a lot of these, you know, sort of extras. And that was DJ that was working on the project. And, you know, so my point is, there is a point at a project where a producer in that traditional sense might say what you're saying, you know, like, hey, I think we crossed the line here. Mm-hmm. And I think that there should be, but it's not a given, you know, it's a negotiation, it's a discussion, and it's you know, quite frankly, it's somewhat contentious, because that's where a lot of them, if not all the money is in ownership of the song, you know, and that copyright. So, mm-hmm. So there is I hear what you're saying, and I and I agree to an extent, but it has to be a separate sort of negotiation. It has to be it usually is a separate sort of thing.
Yeah. I can real quick. I can relate. We produced, my partner and I worked with this Brazilian artist named Jael, amazing artist, and he gave us a lot of the songs already, the chords and the melodies and the words, and we turned it into a physical. You know, we recorded everything, programmed, and for those songs we took 25% of the publishing, because we're like, look, we're the ones who turned it into a reality. Mm. You know, and then a lot of, I don't know what kind of advice you give, but a lot of my students will say, look, I'm working with an artist. They want me to engineer their album. They don't have a lot of money. I'm like, okay, then you should get some publishing. They're not going to pay you up front. You should at least get some publishing. But even on top of that, in Canada, and I don't want to say too much, but there are, because the only reason I don't want to say too much, I don't know all the details, but mm-hmm. now session engineers and sound engineers are getting a certain amount of publishing. I don't know the details, but a friend of mine who I did a lot of the work on, did a lot of session musicianship on Motley Crue albums and Aerosmith albums, and mm-hmm. didn't really write anything, but they're getting, you know, nice fat check every month. So I think that's important. We don't need to talk about that too much, but that's right. Kind of why I brought that up. I think that needs to come up more, and yeah, I think that story's cool.
I agree, especially since, look, I'll be honest, you know, if you were getting 3 or 4 points in the past as a producer, you know, not a composer, mm-hmm. That was pretty good, because sales were good. You know, bands did sell. Like I Am sold several million albums, yeah. Double albums too. So like, I'm not complaining, you know, but now you don't have that. You know, you don't have income generated from album sales. You have income generated from everything but, you know,
yeah.
You know, licensing, touring, you know, what have you. But it's not like bands aren't like, in that traditional sense, going out and selling, you know, that $20 CD or double album anymore. It just doesn't exist. That's like old school. That's a fantasy that is in you know, in today's terms. It's just not, you know.
Yeah.
So you're right. So it has to shift. You have to get paid from where you can't draw blood from a stone.
Yeah, you got to get something. Yeah, you got to get something, definitely. Cool. So we started talking. I didn't get a chance to finish because we went on such a cool tangent. But so you did 2 Public Enemy albums, a bunch of Public Enemy songs outside of those 2 albums. And you also did, which we will get to, I want to talk about that story soon, the Ice Cube America's Most Wanted album. And you did It Takes Two by Rob Bass and DJ Easy Rock, the single, huge single. And then you did Poison, right? By Belle Biv DeVoe.
I did. I worked on that album. I recorded that song, but I didn't mix that song. Again, that was a piecemeal. Like I worked on some songs on that album.
Okay.
Like you know, It Takes Two. I just did the song It Takes Two and Joy and Pain. Like essentially they're
That's
two
right. Join Pain
singles,
also.
but not. I didn't do like a whole album or anything.
Yeah, but those singles were big.
No, they were big. They were
Yeah,
big.
they were.
They were big.
And what did you do on It Takes Two and Join Pain?
On Joy and Pain, I did. On It Takes Two, I mixed it. So
Okay.
that's a funny story.
Let's hear it.
I was pretty young. I don't know, 25, years old. I was a staff engineer at Green Street Recording, and Green Street did a lot of hip hop. I mean, that's where we did all the PE, and they did a lot of hip hop. I mean, that's where they recorded Run DMC and Curtis Blow and Lovebug Starsky. It's like one of the places that really was the starting point of a lot of New York hip hop.
A lot of rap music, yep.
Yeah, and I mean, the list goes on and on. Dougie Fresh, it just keeps going. So, so these guys who they just literally came in off the street and said, "We want to have this track mixed," and the manager said, "I could recommend a guy, one of our staff guys," and so like it was like a completely random thing, and the guy brought the tape in. I don't know, 3 or 4 hours later, that's all he had money to afford in terms of the mix, and and we just did it. It was like the most sort of like, what was that? Who was that? How did they find out about the studio? Like, it was like just like literally like almost off the street. Like just somebody walked in. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll mix it. I'd be happy to mix it. It's cool. Yeah. And then the next thing you know, it's like the
huge song.
You can't walk away from it. You hear it everywhere.
How long was it after you mixed it that the song came out? I'm just curious.
Not long after. And I remember I lived in the East Village at the time, and I'm like, holy shit, that's that song, because on every song, on 14th Street, down near Alphabet City, I just hear it blasting out of every car,
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's that song, and then it became, sort of big.
And that was It Takes Two.
It Takes Two.
And then you did Join Pain afterwards?
After that, then they came back and said, we want to do another song with you. And they came back and actually did some, I mixed it, but they came back and did some additional recording. We re-recorded some samples that they couldn't get clearance for and things like that. And so
interesting.
I worked a little bit more on the construction of that song, but then I mixed it as well. But that was a little more organized because, they were like totally legit at that point. It wasn't like a guy walked in off the street and he's like, hey, this is Green Street. I know you guys do a lot of hip hop. You got somebody who can mix this track for me,
Yeah.
2-inch tape. Obviously it was all tape, But it was kind of like that then too, I mean, there was a lot of, I don't know, it somehow was just more independent and like less formal, and then it became very hip hop. I mean, it became very corporate and very pop music oriented, but at that time still, it's at the late 80s, right? That's it was still very,
fresh.
Super innovative and lots of hustling going on and lots of characters, and it hadn't like become this huge sort of corporate thing,
Yeah.
soon became because of it had to, because it was so
the money it was making.
It was so making so much money,
Yeah. So speaking of cool stories, let's just get right into this Ice Cube story, because the first time I met you, I was familiar with what you've done, and I believe I saw the Ice Cube plaque on your wall, America's Most Wanted, and I just asked some random questions, and you told me a pretty crazy story of how that album was made. I think it was made within 2 weeks, 24 hours a day, and they were grabbing people off the street for the interludes, and just the guy who works at the deli downstairs is the one who said, any last words. And that is a crazy story, and I don't believe it's out there.
Right.
And this is an album that, obviously I'm sure you knew Ice Cube was to some extent. And I know we talked before, and you didn't necessarily come from a hip hop background, but you kind of do because of the work you've done. And Ice Cube was in the group NWA, so that album was huge. And then he's doing a solo album, and that album changed a lot. A lot of hip hop people, such as myself, especially people 35 and older, I would say, a lot of us would say that that album changed our life. It was a groundbreaking album. So to hear the story, I would like to tell you, I would like you to kind of go and talk about the story, like, you know, talk
Yeah,
talk about it, man, because it's as awesome as the album is itself. The story is just as dope as the album. Like you, so let me ask you this: is this true? 24 hours a day, people were in the studio working on that album.
pretty much. I mean, maybe, pretty much. I remember just like sleeping in the hallway because I needed to catch a little sleep. But we had two studios running at Green Street Recording. Again, this is at Green Street Recording, which is in the Soho district of Manhattan. And there's two studios, and of course the Bomb Squad was producing, and there'd be two studios going, the front room and the back room, and then Cube brought producers from LA with him as well. So we were like two production teams working on it at the same time, the Bomb Squad and his squad.
So do you remember the names of those producers?
There was T-Bone, Sir Jinx.
Sir Jinx, yep.
T-Bone and Sir Jinx are the two I remember.
Two main ones.
The two main ones.
Who was in the Bomb Squad? Who are all the members of the exact say?
So the members
I mean,
of
the Shockley brothers, but wasn't Eric Sadler also?
Yeah, Hank Shockley, Keith Shockley, Eric Sadler, Chuck D. Like that's really
the four main
of the Bomb Squad. Then people would come and go too. There was Gary G. Wiz who came in later. Eric left the production team at a certain point. There'd be some players who would come in and do some parts here and there. But it was really Hank, Keith, Eric Sadler, and Chuck. What
about the greater team? Yourself, obviously, you were technically a member of the Bomb Squad in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and then like on the recording side, I would say that Rod Way, who's kind of my mentor, he's the guy who really taught me how to record all this stuff. Rod Way was, he still is. It's not dead or anything. Rod Way was the guy who recorded all that early hip hop. So he did the first Run DMC records. He did Curtis Blow. Like I said, he did Starsky. He did all these early hip hop artists, and that was like one of the things that brought a lot of he did Salt and Pepper. A lot of what was happening at that time came to Green Street because of him. In the early days, like I'm talking Curtis Blow days, right? So. And he had an approach about how to capture it. And ironically, his other thing that he did really well was heavy metal. So like he did like the most thrashing metal you'd ever hear, and then he would turn around and do hip hop, and so he also had this sort of like heavy rock on one side and hip hop on the other. But anyway,
which actually isn't that ironic.
There's
a lot of similarities.
It's ironic that then he would take me under his wing, and then we essentially we both had that sort of that predisposition, that noise was noise, and let's do what we can with it. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. So I would say on the recording side, it would be Rod, myself, another engineer and mixer named Chris Shaw. Then like a cast of others who would come in and go. Chris Champion was another one, Gingy Brown. it was just like a whole slew of people that, there was a core, and then there were others like who were assistants or who like would tag team in for a minute while you're trying to get something to eat or something like that, But that record was crazy because like they came in, I think 2 weeks, maybe a little bit more, and they're like, we got to finish this whole record, and that was it. They locked out the studio, both studios. Nobody came or went, in that 2 week, maybe a little bit longer than that, and it was just nonstop. Both rooms going, stuff would be worked on in one room to track it. Maybe we send the tape into the other room. They can start some vocals on that, or then they could send it back over. We could start mixing it. It was constant. And, it would be the middle of the night, and these guys would be, we'd be working on something, and these guys, we need a voice, so Nick, say this. And they're like, no, your voice isn't interesting enough. We need this, we need that. So literally go out into the lobby, who's working on the night shift. This guy, Mitch, like, Mitch, come on in, audition these people, say these lines, like, nah, it's not so good, but this is a good line for you. And they're like, who can we get? Like, well, I don't know, so go down the block and see who's, this 24-hour, deli, bodega open, see if anybody would come down and want to do it, or call a friend, like, you got any friends that have a voice like this, so it was just, whatever you could possibly muster, and because there was no like tomorrow with that record. There was no tomorrow. It wasn't like, oh, okay, don't worry, we'll get to it. It wasn't that. There was a really finite, like, he wanted to stay in New York X amount of days. People were coming from LA. Everything was booked. You got to get it done. If you don't get it done, it's not going to get done.
Yeah.
That was really the reality of it.
Yeah.
So it was crazy. I mean, I was falling asleep all the time working. So where everybody was, they'd be like literally over the tape machine, and Eric would be like, yo, wake up. And I'm like, where the fuck am I? But that was, again, it was part of the energy of the whole scene, really, because it was still developing and still becoming a thing. It was still finding its feet, but that was great. I mean, it was a lot of fun. In retrospect, I mean, I could never do it physically today, but in retrospect, it was amazing, having that experience.
Yeah. Did you, as you were part of it, were you thinking, this is nuts, this album is crazy, this is going to change things? Keep going. One second.
No, I mean,
no.
Pardon me. It's very difficult when you're working on something to look past it, it just is. And people ask that of like Daydream Nation, or like when you're working with PE, or did you know? And the honest answer is no.
You were just focusing on the music at hand.
You're doing what you're doing, and you have a relationship with the people in the room, and you're not really thinking about, holy shit, this is going to change the world. The only moment I have this is 30 some odd years ago, right? Because I'm 57 right now, and that was the late 80s, early 90s there. So what was that? It was like, 30 plus years ago, 40 years ago. The recording Chuck doing the vocal on Black Steel.
Black Steel, an Hour of Chaos.
Yeah, that was one of the moments when I knew that
something just hit you.
Something special was happening. Yeah. Like that this man was the poet of his generation. Like this was a very important person, crafting words and emotions that were just, they were jumping right off the tape. Because when you're recording people, the thing that it's very difficult to explain, but a live performance is one thing. And then because you have the visual, you have the sonic, you have so many different things going on. And then when you play something back, all of a sudden what you thought was great kind of falls flat because I don't know, you don't have all the other external stimuli going on with the people and everything else.
Hmm.
But this was something that just on playback and while he was recording it was one of the moments, one of the only moments, quite frankly, that I was like, well, this is
This
special.
is,
And
yeah,
this special person, and this is something I'm, I'm not going to soon forget. And I haven't. That was a long time ago.
yeah.
So, but other than that, you just don't know. You really just don't know. You don't know. You
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
For me anyway. But
Yeah.
just felt.
Speaking of like Chuck D, Public Enemy, for them, the message that they were saying was very radical and not something that you think would ever be mainstream. But it became mainstream in a lot of ways. Like it was, again, I don't know the numbers offhand, nor do I necessarily care. But I just know where I grew up was a very mixed environment, and everyone was listening to Public Enemy.
Yeah.
Everybody was listening to Public Enemy. Like you, that's what you did. You listened to when they came out, and but the message was even something today would be considered very radical and very much there's a lot of pushback. Obviously, anytime you're making a voice that humanizes the Black experience or any experience of any marginalized group, but particularly Black in the United States, for him to just very unapologetically pro-Black
Yeah.
and for
Yeah.
yet to be that big and that mainstream, um, I guess it's amazing,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word.
It is. It is. And I just think it was done with such sort of grace and craft and
Hmm.
intelligence and power. The power of communication was off the charts.
Yeah.
It wasn't just expressing for me an idea of anger. It was telling you the whole story. It was telling you why and how and like, in the most poetic, beautiful way you possibly could
Hmm.
say it. And I mean, really too, I guess the Ice Cube record was, in retrospect, they say like amongst the first like sort of gangster rap albums. Again, that was the language on that. I thought, oh shit, they're gonna, it's not gonna fly. But then, it became very commonplace, the
Hmm.
language that they used on that.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I guess, and I guess that was part of their, not I guess, I know for a fact that was part of Chuck's mission. He tells a really great story about how when he would tour with Def Jam, he would always sit with Daddy-O from Stetsasonic on the bus. And he's saying, like, they planned all this out. They planned the whole concept of having the production team, of what they would say, having the S1Ws, having, they kind of planned it out. It was not like a random sort of statement or thing.
Hmm.
It was very much a concept that was worked on for quite some time
Hmm. Hmm. So,
and brought to reality.
yeah, well, speaking of planned out, so back to the Ice Cube album. 2 weeks, he had to record that album. Well, you guys had to record that album in 2 weeks. How much was already done? Were any of the vocals already recorded? How
No,
No vocals.
the
What
only thing,
about
the things that were done were the beats were in the machine,
okay? And
and
what
he,
machine? With the SP 1200 or
I
was it
want to say, I don't know if by that point it moved over to the Akai, the Akai Lin,
mhm,
um, uh, or if it was still an SB 1200, but it was either one
it
of
was one of
those
those two?
one of those two. That was the only two, really the two that
Mess
Eric
with.
used, and or we used, and we used S900 sampler and S1000 sampler, so that would be their setup. Turntables would be set up, but the beats were made, the beats were in the machines. Some of the structures of the songs were still being worked on. Um,
Hmm.
you know, uh, a lot of
Well,
the, none of the inserts were made. all the little,
Transitions and
yeah, no,
all
that
that.
was all done like right in the studio with like sound effects and, like I said, grabbing people off the street or bringing a microphone out and recording something on the street. Or,
That's pretty amazing because there was a lot of that on that album.
there's a lot. There was
There's
a
a
lot,
lot of that.
with
Yeah.
and again, none of us knew what the hell we were doing, because I mean there are professionals who do that, like Foley operators who are like, okay, we need to get footsteps, like
Yeah.
or we need a slamming of the door, and we need this, we need that. So we were really working hard to find sound sample libraries and borrowing. I remember borrowing a couple of libraries from another studio. Just or making shit up as we needed to.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
So okay, you said that when you're saying the beats are done, I guess my question would be, there were songs on that album, definitely other Public Enemy albums as well, a lot of Bomb Squad music. Um, and there's a song in particular I'll get to. I think Sons of Berserk is the name, but we'll get to that in a second. But in general, Ice Cube's album, there were tracks that changed multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
So the beats would change.
Right.
So did they, when you say the beats were done, I'm guessing those changes weren't done. Maybe the producer made all the separate beats and was like, hey, Nick, and you guys put it all together?
No, not necessarily. I mean, Eric would have a lot of those transitions ready to go.
Okay.
What might not be ready to go is, oh, you know what? That verse should last another 8 bars. And if that happens, then maybe that other transition needs another 4 bars, or, like how they would, but Eric was very prepared. He was the most prepared guy you could possibly imagine. Like he wouldn't come in and say, I've got these things in the machine and I'm not sure how we're going to lay them down. They would have a starting point map that said, this would go here, that, and then we would, and then of course it would develop as ideas happened, and you could, we used to record those, the sequences in a way that we can go back and re-record them. You would say now it's like, what's the big deal about that? Well, if you're in a DAW, no big deal. But we were on tape, so we would set up a system that we would have time code and some MIDI time code going at the same time, and we used this box called the SPX80, I think it was called, by Roland. Mm-hmm. And essentially it was a box that allowed you to like sort of remember and record sync data. So you could just, oh, we want to change that, we want to move that over, we want to re-record that, oh, we want to re-record, add 4 bars here or something like that. And it enabled us to do that, to have like this go back and forth relationship with the sequencer, the sampler, and the tape recorder. Okay. So wow. That would be, if it developed that we had to relay something or so forth and so on,
Okay, so going over that, like you're saying, Eric Sadler was chopping up the samples and this and that. What were the roles of the different members of the Bomb Squad, and then what was your role, not just on the Ice Cube album, or maybe it changed over albums, but in general, what was your role in the Bomb Squad, like as far as what you actually did? And then as far as the beat making, was that mainly Eric Sadler, and were the Shockley brothers more kind of coming with some ideas, etc.? I mean, I don't know how much you can talk about that, but as much as you can.
Yeah, well, I mean, I could talk about what I know to be fact. And in the most general terms, I think that Hank was sort of the CEO, right? He was the organizer. He was the sort of the leader, not necessarily the creative leader, but the person who
entrepreneurial vision
did all the logistics and like, we're going to do this, have a meeting here, that, he was kind of that role.
Mm-hmm. And Hank was
yeah. Awesome. Keith was more on the creative side, not so much that sort of managerial like leadership type side.
Mm-hmm.
Eric was definitely on the tech side. Like Eric was like the masterful technician who could sample anything from anywhere and slice it in just the right way to, and then can reconstruct it.
So Keith would say, look, I like this Isley Brothers record right here, but look, can we do this and change this up and put this sample from here on top of it? And then Eric would
Yes.
say, sure, I can do that. Boom. That's
Yeah,
what that's.
or like Eric would have like a core beat. Every song was different, of course, but Eric would then, they would come in with a constructed core beat that they would do in, cooperation with each other. They would collaborate in their like home, prep studio,
Mhm.
But my recollection is a lot of the add-ins, a lot of the thrown samples and stuff. That's Keith a lot of times. Taking something off a turntable, putting, getting it into the S1000 or the S900, and then, getting it on the track.
Mhm.
But they definitely like, and Chuck, of course, again, a strong creative, mastermind behind a lot of it, but he had an encyclopedic, and Hank did too, knowledge. Like if they needed something, they knew what record to go to get it in terms of
Mhm.
sampling. I need an oh yeah, or I need a scream, or I need a horn turnaround.
And you
right?
said Chuck would know that?
Chuck would know that, Hank would know that, like an encyclopedia, like a database. They're
Yeah.
like, oh, why don't we try, Mandrill live at so-and-so, 1972, and like this
Mhm.
most obscure thing. And then like it would be pick it out of the milk crate, and it would come with crates and, records.
Yeah. So
And then go about, finding and lifting and then sampling and putting them on tracks.
okay, so besides that, what was Chuck's role also? Was he like once he heard the beat, was he say, okay, in order for me to rap on this, you guys need to do this and that to it, or you need
Yeah,
to
but a lot of that I think was done beforehand. And if he wrote verses that extended, that's when that's when changes would happen in the studio.
okay.
Where an extension of a section, or an addition of a section, or an insert, interlude, breakdown, those types of things. But he also was very organized in terms of how the lyrics would work with the songs, with the beats. He was not one to write in the studio all that much.
Mhm.
I've worked with a lot of hip hop artists who like they're writing when they get there.
Yeah, not a fan of
I always
that.
thought it was kind of ludicrous because
Why?
time is money.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
um, but he was always very organized. Always had songs prepared. Again, you want to change them, you can. I mean, that's part of the process. I mean, he would even have it mapped out to where Flavor, you would come in here, we throw this sample here, then Flavor, you say this, and then I come back for this verse. Like he had it all sort of,
Mhm.
Mapped out in his head. Even to the extent of like in a song like Black Steel and Yarrow Chaos, like there's those telephone. He calls
Flav.
on the phone. Right?
Yep.
All right, so like again, like I don't know how you're going to do this, but we need the phone to ring here. Flavor's going to answer it. Talk, and that's all real. That's all like, so, okay, so let's mic the phones. Like we didn't use like effects or anything. I'm like, all right, Flavor, go out in the lobby. Chuck's gonna call you. I'll mic up the phone. You pick up the phone. We just like, but again, it would be Chuck or Keith, or Hank they knew exactly what they wanted, where they wanted it, and not necessarily how they were going to do it, but they knew what they wanted.
Okay. And so you said that Keith would be the one who'd bring the turntables effects in. Would Terminator, was that correct, or is that would be Keith?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because Terminator would do, or say like Johnny Juice, would be there sometimes. There's another DJ, Johnny Juice Rosario, who
Mhm.
would do some stuff. Terminator, obviously. Like, I'm talking about not so much turntablist stuff, but like, okay, we're getting out records and we're sampling. We're going to put X, what, these 15 samples and spread them out on a program on a keyboard, so they could be placed, where they should be.
Uh-huh.
Sort of. Like,
Yeah,
I remember Keith doing a lot of
a lot of
that.
that. Okay.
Yeah.
But as far as the turntablism, because there was some turntablism in that song, in that album, like
Yeah, but that's
the drop the
Terminator.
bomb and
Yeah,
like that,
that's either Terminator.
or Johnny J.
And yeah,
Okay,
that wasn't any of the Bomb Squad people. They didn't do turntable
cool.
work like that. Creative turntable work like that.
Cool. Well, okay, so what about you? What was your role? I guess in the Ice Cube album, but just in general with the Bomb Squad. I know that you talked about, getting ideas, putting it to tape, getting. Talk about it. What was your specific role?
Well, I think that what it was again what I guess what we have to understand is we had to get this stuff to tape.
Yeah.
We didn't, and we had 22 tracks to use to put all this stuff to tape. So where would the samples go? How would we record all the little bits and pieces? How could we make it sound impactful coming off the tape? Because we got to go to sort of going to a completely, a different medium that sounds different.
Yeah.
Just like vinyl sounds different from a digital file.
Mm-hmm.
So there was always that challenge of capturing that noise and capturing that sort of capturing all the inaccuracies, capturing all these interesting sounds and being impactful with them, just to get them through the console and on tape, and how it would come out of the sequencer. So we would map it out, and I would say, Eric, okay, kick drum 1, kick drum 2, make that come out of output 1 and 2, and then have those come out of output 4 and 5, and then I'll mix those together because I think we're okay, because I'm already thinking about mixing.
So are you recording these in real time, like different sequencers? Are you syncing them, like MIDI syncing?
We're syncing things. We're putting them on in, not necessarily in real time, but if Eric had a beat, and that beat consisted of, say, 3 different kick drums, 2 different snare drums, 3 or 4 different micro samples, and sort of some sort of bass sample, we would like put them all out, different outputs, treat them differently, and then and put them to tape. The different outputs of the different sequencers, they had built-in filtering, so we had to make sure that we were putting them in the right order. I don't know why they did that, but a lot of the sequencers did. Like, you would have essentially low pass filtering, sequentially going down the outputs, especially the SP1200 was like that. So getting all that stuff from there to the tape, and then like realizing that, okay, so when this transition happens in this transition, we're going to have to mix this section and this section. Well, you talked about Son of Berserk, which was like change.
Change of style by Son of Berserk.
Yeah, so we had to. So essentially, what we would do is, on my side, would be map it out. These are all the songs. These are all the sounds in the song. These are all the sections of the song. How do they have to hit the tape in order for us to be able to play that tape back, bring it out to the console, and then mix it? Because again, we didn't have like the automation. We didn't have. It was not a DAW. It was to a tape recorder.
Yeah.
And how to keep it impactful. Another thing is that there is always a lag. So when you wanted to layer kick drums, for instance, or layer snare drums, after the fact, there's always a lag. Meaning, even if it's a tight sync with SMPTE timecode or something, there's always that much.
A bit of a time difference.
So I would actually measure. I would measure the difference, and we would adjust the SMPTE timecode, the bit in bits. So we would measure like the kick drum that was on the tape would be on, we'd have that, we would bounce that over to a 2-track. So we'd have the real kick drums here, and here's the new one we want to fly in on the right. And then we would measure the distance between the kick drum on the left and the kick drum on the right. I think every millimeter equaled like 11 bits or something like that. So,
wow.
you know, so it was a lot of like, again, it all worked in the sequencer, but now we got to get it to tape, and we got to get the vocals on it, and we got to do it in a way that we're able to play those 20 some odd tracks back through a console and actually mix it and make it sound cohesive, you know, with all the other elements. And so that, I mean, like that's kind of my role. That was my role, you know, like that sort of mapping and that sort of, okay, so if this section is going to be this, then we got to get all those elements because that's the next section. Those have to be on separate tracks. And then mixing was chaos.
Insane. It sounds like it.
We would have to rehearse it, right? So we would be like, all right, I'll take faders 8 through 12 because, like, okay, those are the vocals and some of the key things, and I'm going to need to ride those, right? You know, to change levels and like.
Yeah.
So Eric, can you take faders 1 through 8? Keith, you got to take the echo send, you know, turn it on for when we want to have the repeats happen on the echo. Who else is here? Get somebody from the lobby because they got to.
I remember you were saying Flav was in there sometimes. Like,
oh yeah, absolutely, Flav. All you got to do, I'll give you the high sign. Just turn that shit on, and then I'll give you the high sign and turn it off. So there'd be like 7 people around the console, and we would have to rehearse it, you know.
Yeah, of course.
And then we rehearse, and we're like, okay, I think we're ready. I think we could do this. And then we would mix, and inevitably, someone would make a mistake. Me, I was not, you know, anyone. We were mixing to a 2-track machine. You know? So we would stop the 2-track, fast forward a little bit, and rewind our master a little bit, and start mixing again, picking up where we made the mistake. And then I would go over to the 2-track and put those 2 pieces together. So a mix consisted of, maybe we would mix for 1.5 minutes without a mistake. Then we would make a mistake. We successfully did 1.5 minutes.
Yeah.
So
let's take that. Gotcha.
Yeah, and then I'm editing in the other piece. Oh, we made another mistake. Stop. Okay, rewind, pick it up, and then we do it, and then piece that. So that, you know, so that was like, yeah, that was Rob, that was me. At times it was Chris. But that was our role. Like that's what we were doing. And then finding a way, and then in mixing, we were just trying to find a way to bring that chaos and impact in a way that was understandable, you know, through these 2 speakers, you know. So yeah,
I think hearing that, especially like a younger generation, because I can sort of relate because I used to make mixtapes on 16-track, like Tascam, Porta Studio. Porta Studio was less than 16, but I used to make, and so I had to do like an hour of like, okay, at 12 minutes and 53 seconds, I got to turn the reverb on for this. So I can relate in that sense. But these the younger people, telling them, okay, you have to mix, and you actually had to mix in real time. It's just like, how different is that from mixing on a DAW? It's completely different.
It's
a different world.
Comparison. I mean, even in between the 2 of those, there was automation. There was analog automation.
Yeah.
But we, you know, in that particular studio at that particular time, the analog automation, we tried it a few times and we bailed on it because it was too cumbersome and too slow. It kind of took away, it just took away the energy, you know, because it was a really crude system. It wasn't like a new, like Neve Flying Faders or Massenburg or something like that. Which would come very soon after that. Yeah. And then like SSL and stuff. But this was still like, not pre that, but like for us, it was pre that, you know, like it wasn't common enough to like that would be what would be happening.
Well, being that we're talking about all these great projects and whatnot, what was you talked about the one time you worked with Chuck and you were doing Black Steel in the Hour of Chaos and you realized, okay, this is something special. Was there any other time where you were just like it just hit on you like I'm a part of history and I'm doing something that I guess how do I explain it? I guess you kind of said it with Black Steel. Is there another time where you were working on something you realized as you were working on it, you're like, wow, or was that really the only time that that happened?
That was the most memorable. I mean, there have been other moments when I, being so wrapped up in my own head and like, you know,
Can you talk about how you got into to audio engineering and music production? Like what was your first step? What was your
well,
plan? A lot of audio engineers that I know, legendary audio engineers, their first thing is I wanted to be a professional guitar player in a rock band, and then this happened and this happened. And
right.
how you know?
Well, it's very similar. I mean, I went to music school. I went to the
Mhm.
Berklee
Went to
College of
Berkeley.
Music.
Yep.
Yeah, and I graduated, and I was, I studied arranging and orchestration. I finished all my principal instrument proficiencies. I'm a piano player, and but it happened to me while I was in school. Pardon me. I was in a band, and we recorded something, a demo, so to speak,
Hmm.
Um, and a
This was
friend of
high
mine,
school. High school.
no, this in
Yeah,
college at
in college.
Berkeley.
Yeah, at Berkeley. Got you. Got you.
Yeah. Um, in and then friends of mine were producing demos and stuff. Obviously, it's very limited what you could do at home in those days. You had to go to a studio to get stuff recorded.
Mhm.
So the more I hung out in that recording environment, the more I realized that I was more comfortable there because I was in a band that we played. We played a lot. We were called the Fabulous Soul Dukes. It wasn't it was a cover-ish type band. It was a soul R&B soul review band, and I was a
Nice name, by
keyboard
the way.
player, you know. And
Mhm.
so we would travel around the Northeast and do shows, and it was fun. But there's two things there that I kind of realized it was fun, but I didn't feel I was good enough to be professional at it.
Mhm.
Like take it to the next level. Felt like there were a lot of people who had more to offer as an instrumentalist and things like that around me, and at the same time, I was really falling in love with this concept of recording because I felt like with recording you could really focus in on something. You could really focus in on getting it exactly the way you want it, where live was like you kind of say a prayer and
Mhm.
you play the song and they're like, oh, I did the best I could.
Yeah.
I just like the idea of being able to go back, being able to dig in, being able to adjust sounds, like to really hone in on what it is that you're trying to do. And I was really, and I loved the idea of blending music and technology and I did that whole atmosphere. So I kind of, yeah, I started out thinking I'd be a musician exclusively, um, but then in discovering the recording studio, really felt like that would be where I could maybe I
Shine.
could make some money,
Yeah.
I
So
could actually survive.
yeah. So what was your first like gig? What was your first step into the recording studio?
There was a studio in Boston called Newberry Sound, and they they just we did our demos there. They needed some people to do some assisting and stuff like that. So I would do a session here and there, assisting the main engineer, and then they they had some like then they would ask me to do some other sessions like by myself. There were no high stakes. These were very, just
Up
clients
and
on the street, it wasn't
mhm.
anything. And then I would do that. And that's where I started like Newberry Sound. That was like, I wasn't an employee, but I would be doing some freelance sessions there as an engineer while I was at Berkeley, um, while I was in school. And then when I graduated, that was the only studio I worked at. Um, and got paid for. I worked at other studios, in recording my own material or my band's material. But
Mm-hmm.
and then when I finished, I'm like, I want to go back to New York because that's originally where I was from. Um, and so I started. I said, all right, well, I'm going to start looking for work in a recording studio,
Mm-hmm.
and I did, and that's how I
Got to Green Street,
took
excuse
that.
me.
Excuse me.
That's how you got to Green Street?
Eventually, I worked at another place called Evergreen for a bit on the Upper West Side. I was at a place called Eris Recording over in like the Kips Bay area, Manhattan. I was at a place called O Records near Columbus Circle. I kind of bopped around just trying to find some footing, find some. I was working at Eris one day. That seemed to be pretty good. That was already a really steady gig. I was doing some engineering, making some money. They did a lot of jingles. They did a lot of jazz. It was interesting. It was
Mm-hmm.
things I didn't know about, and I was having the opportunity to record these things on my own, not being an assistant. And then one of the dudes who was working there, he left and he got a job at Green Street Recording. And he would call me every now and again. And he called me one night. I was at the studio working on some sort of Ford commercial or something. And I'm like, I was happy. I was young and like just making some money. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool,
Yeah, yeah.
I was very, very fortunate, But when he said, I said, well, what are you working on over there? He's like, I'm at Green Street. I'm at work. I'm like, oh yeah. How, what are you guys working on? And he's like, Run DMC. And I'm like, fuck. I want to work on. I don't want to work with Ford motor truck, whatever the fuck we were doing. I like no. Like why? Is, I didn't say that to him, of course, but I'm like, why is he there working with Run DMC and I'm here, like doing. I mean, I'm really fortunate and I'm blessed to actually be able to work. But like, I want to work with Run DMC, or
Mm-hmm.
In the big picture. Like I want to be in that scene.
Of course.
So that's when I went to Green Street. I said, all right, well, I'm just going to go. And I was like, look, I really, when you need people, I would love to work here. I'll do anything you want me to do. I'm engineering uptown, but I'll come down here and be an assistant. I'll be a flunky. I'll do whatever you want. I don't care. I'm still young. I don't really care. And then eventually they called me. And then I became an assistant, and then I became an engineer, and then I brought all my productions there, and so forth and so on. Mm-hmm. So it was a you had to sort of find some footing along the way,
mm-hmm.
And it was interesting too. And I think this is good advice for other young people. I never tried to work at a big studio or a big company, because I saw that you can get lost in the soup, and you can
mm-hmm.
be an general assistant or an intern type person or a very low level person for a very long time.
Yep.
Because they're a huge machine, there's a lot of money flying around, and they kind of don't need you, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
But all these studios that I worked at were small. They were doing not mainstream music. There was some who were doing commercials, the other was doing jazz, the other O Records, that wasn't even released to the public. Those were records that were being made and then distributed only to DJs.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like a DJ servicing company where we would, these artists would come in and make these like extended 12-inch records, and they would never see the light of day. They would just go to DJs. Mm-hmm. They would be servicing DJs. So I was always looking for like smaller places, always looking for like indie, always looking for a place where you could actually learn and shine and not be under the cloud of this huge corporation or this big studio or what have you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think that's what allowed me to move quickly.
Move up the ladder. That's awesome. I appreciate you doing this. It's a really honor to interview you and have you on this podcast. And I've listened to your work. America's Most Wanted is probably my top 5 albums of all time, and of course Public Enemy. And I grew up hearing Bob Bass and both of their big songs, Joy and Pain, It Takes Two, and BBD Poison is still a song today that you could play in the club and
Yeah, people
people
go
know
nuts.
that song. Yeah,
I
that song is
regret
crazy.
not being able to. That the guy who mixed that song, it was funny. His name is Kirk Yano, and
Hmm.
Kirk did a lot of dance mixes and mostly dance type stuff. I don't think he did a lot of hip hop. Kirk Yano, and I haven't seen him for years, but I was on his ass because I guess I was a little jealous. I'm like, Kirk, because I recorded it and we were working on that record for quite some time, but I didn't mix that song.
Hmm.
Like, Kirk, that snare drum is crazy loud. I'm like, come on. And he's like, no, man, it's good. It's good. I'm like, it's not gonna work. I mean, it's all snare drum. And sure enough, I was wrong. I mean, that's part of it,
I
that's,
know.
you
That's
know,
crazy.
so it's like, oh, it's so much for that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's a crazy, funny story. Um, yeah, man. Thank you so much. Um, I appreciate it. Any last words you want to say to any young up and coming engineers? Any advice you can give?
Uh, well, my advice is a couple of things. I think that, value the service you provide. Everybody wants everybody to work for free. You can't.
Yeah.
You just can't. You have to value the service that you're providing people. Many engineers, I think that everyone can hear these disparate elements and assemble them to make it sound cohesive. Because to us, it's somewhat second nature. But that's not the case. I just want to tell young people that if you have the ability to put all these elements that are not meant to be together to make this new, more glorious sounding thing, that's a gift. That's a talent that should be valued and priced accordingly. And I also think that you should not limit the style of music that you work in, because you can't do that and be professional. I mean,
Hmm.
I've done music in the south of France, with northern African artists. I've been to Belfast, Northern Ireland with Irish artists, Australia, New Zealand, Barcelona, Italy. Uh, I've done South African artists. And you know what? You're not going to know what you're doing, but that's
Hmm.
okay, because you'll realize there's a lot of commonalities between everyone's music and everyone's culture that you think there are none, and then you get in there and you're like, oh, wait a minute, yes, there's this core structure, there's this underlying harmony that's moving, there's this underlying sense of melodic rhythm, there's this, there's that. Oh yeah, I know all this. It's music, and I know how to capture it and blend it. So I would say those are the two things: value what you do. Don't overvalue it. Don't become, big-headed about it, and don't limit yourself to style and genre. You got to move, and you have to be proficient everywhere in order to make this a career.
Hmm. Hmm.
You just do.
Awesome. 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 Thanks a lot, man. I really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
My pleasure.
Um,
Best wishes to you.
Thank you.
Hopefully, I'll see you in person soon.